So, starting here, we're about to do our reading, but I wanted to go to Google Classroom first. You're in the week of September 21st, 25th. Those of you who are online should already have a video to watch on how to do this. But I did have this assignment. We will do that this week. For your motivational writing this week, it was the login with no red ink about groups. So right there is where you do that. I explained this to you earlier, but we just did that in class. We're getting ready to read our reading out loud 3 times so that we can do our bell ringers and answer our questions. And we are on page 42, and the scanned documents are in the book, The Black Death, right? Looks like this. Everybody's with me? Perfect. Okay, so 2 target words that were on your vocabulary that you answered on your slide. One was estimate, to make a guess related to number, amount, or size. And the other was courageous, which meant brave. And you might have said to be a firefighter or be a nurse. Someone must be courageous to do your sentence there. Okay? So, 3 readings. We'll read the first reading, and then we're going to answer some questions. First time through, though, I want you listening for what is this science feature mostly about. Okay. The Black Death. The Black Death killed 25 million people. Find out how this disease spread through an entire continent. The plague arrives. It started in Sicily in 1347. A ship docked in the town of Messina. But this ship was unlike any other. It was a ship of death. A mysterious illness had seized the crew. Many of them were already dead. The townspeople tried to turn the ship away, but it was too late. Rats scurried off the ship and into the streets of Messina. The bubonic plague, or Black Death, had arrived. First, people in Messina started dying. Then the disease spread rapidly throughout Europe. Soon, millions of people were dying from the plague. At one point, 500 people a day died in Pisa, Italy. Nearly 800 people a day died in Paris, France, fighting off death. With so many people getting sick and dying, families were torn apart. People fled their homes. Husbands left their wives. Parents abandoned their sick children. Soon, there were too many bodies to bury. Corpses were stacked high in graveyards. Ditches overflowed with the dead. Bodies piled up in the streets. People thought it was the end of the world. For 5 years, the Black Death swept through Europe. Historians estimate that it killed 25 million people. It had a bigger impact than any other disease in history. Today, we know that the plague was carried by rats. The rats had fleas that bit people and infected them. But back then, no one knew how the plague spread. There was no cure for it. Turning to the next page. Top of 44, a brutal death. What exactly was the Black Death, and how did it kill people? First, it began with a headache. Then came fevers, chills, nausea, and pain. Soon, red blotches appeared on the skin. The lymph nodes in the armpits swelled to the size of eggs. After that, the nodes grew hard until they turned black and oozed blood and pus. In most cases, death came soon afterward. These black, swollen lumps led people to call the plague the Black Death. Return of the plague. After 5 years, the plague died out, but there were outbreaks in later centuries. In 1665, the plague struck the village of Eyam, England. The epidemic allegedly started when a tailor, that's someone who makes clothes, okay, guys? When a tailor in Eyam received a contaminated package from London. The package was infested with fleas carrying the plague. Soon after, the people of Eyam started dying. Instead of fleeing Eam, the villagers did something courageous. They decided to seal off the village from the rest of the countryside. That way, the plague wouldn't contaminate other villages. Then the villagers waited for death. In the end, 260 people died. However, nearly 100 survived. Centuries later, in 2000, scientists wanted to know why some villagers survived the plague. To find out, they did extensive research on the survivors' descendants. They discovered a genetic mutation in the descendants called Delta 32. This mutation may have provided resistance to the plague. Scientists hope this information may help them find a plague vaccine. They want to be prepared, just in case the Black Death strikes again. Okay, back to the beginning. So what is this mostly about? Death, and in this case, the Black Death, right? Had you heard of the Black Death before? No? Maybe? No. Okay. Sometimes people have. It's something that sometimes you've read or studied about. It comes up in social studies, maybe in middle school or elementary school. So just figured I would ask to see if you might have heard of it before. Technically, it's still a thing today. Every summer, we have people who catch bubonic plague or the Black Death. Okay. The thing is, we now know what it is, right? They'll ask you where you've been. You know, sometimes when somebody gets sick, they ask, have you traveled? And if they know you've been to certain parts of the country, then they start doing tests. For instance, right, there's some ticks in parts of the world that can make us sick, right? So they might see, could you have been bit by a tick? Well, in this case, they're checking to see if you've been bit by fleas. And these particular, if you go to visit like Yellowstone National Park or out to the Grand Canyon, any of those areas out there, they have these little critters called prairie dogs. I don't know if you've seen prairie dogs before. They're really a type of rodent. They look a little like those meerkats. They kind of look like that. They can stand up on their back legs. They're kind of long. But they are carriers of the Black Plague. And what happens is people go there to visit the parks. Sometimes they camp, right, or just driving through and they get out and they have picnics. And the fleas can bite you. And the fleas can give you the bubonic plague. However, they can treat you. They can give you something to help keep it from getting that bad so that you won't die. One person did die this year, though, from it. Wasn't in America because this is all over the world. Okay. But he's over in the easterly part of Europe. I want to say it's like Mongolia or something. That's up kind of near China, Russia, all the way over there. But he had been out camping and stuff, and he'd been hunting animals, and that's what he was eating. And so he must have eaten something that either had it and it got it really bad, or he just got bit by a lot of fleas. But he got sick and he didn't get to a hospital in time before so they could give him medicine, and he did die from it this year. So I want to say he was a young man, 18, 19, 20 years old. So he wasn't that old or anything. He was a young person. So it's still around anyway, which makes sense why they might want to study it, right? And see if there is something to those people who survived, why they survived when they quarantined that time. You know, I mean, if you look at it, they said 260 died, but you still had 100 or so survive. Why did they survive? Why did they not die from it? Okay. All right. So during the plague, many people left their families behind and fled to try to save themselves. Do you think it was the right thing to do? Why or why not? Should you run off and leave your family if people are dying, or should you stay with them? It's a hard decision. It's not it's not an easy answer to that. So, what do you think? You think leave? What do you think? Don't know. It's a hard one. I think maybe that question could be affected by where you're at in life. If you were young parents and you had young kids, you might feel differently, right? If I had, my kids are all older, even older than you guys, you know, but, you know, if I had teenagers, I might say, you leave. I might stay with brothers and sisters, but you leave, try to save yourself, right? You know, so I think it does depend on where you're at in life. It's not a right or wrong. It's just a hard decision. It would be hard to stay when you're afraid. It would be hard to leave the people you care about, wouldn't it? So, yeah. Okay, top of 43, there's a question. It says, when did the plague first come to Europe? So what did we see over here? When did it first show up? Yeah, 1347. This is the year 2020, right? Okay, this is the year 2020. So that was quite a while ago, wasn't it? All right. Yeah. But 1347 is when it first hit in the sense that we knew. Now I want you to think about that. They said 25 million people died in 5 years. Not over a long period, 5 years. From the time it first came onto shore in Messina, spread up through Europe and over. So if you've watched, there's one of the Pixar has, you know how they have their little short cartoons. There's the one with the rats. Have y'all seen that one? Okay, I don't know. Maybe we'll get away. We can show it. We'll see. But he talks about how we're not to blame. It wasn't the rat's fault. It was them stupid fleas. Is what he actually talks about. He's talking about the Black Death with it. So anyway. Okay, number 2 over there says, how did the plague spread? Tell the sequence of events. So go back to that first page, down there to the 3rd paragraph. First, people in Messina, what? Yes. Then the disease spread rapidly throughout Europe. Soon, millions were dying from the plague. Good. Okay. So, yeah. That's using those signal words, transition words that showing the passage, right? Events happening, kind of like a passage of time or the order in which they happen. Okay. So in the section, the plague arrives, what is the main idea? What's the main idea for the section called the plague arrives? How it started. How it started, yes. So what's really funny is the words, the plague arrives, that is that heading there, right, in red? And that is what it talks about, isn't it? How the plague got there, how it first showed up, how it arrived, okay? Sometimes when you're asked for the main idea of a section, if there's a heading, see if that heading sums it up for you. That's what it's trying to show you. The heading sometimes is the answer to it, okay? How might things have been different if people during this plague, when this first time took place, that so many people died? How might it have been different if they knew the disease was carried by the rats? What might have happened different? Take the rats away? Yeah. And at that point, sorry, but the rats would probably be killed, wouldn't they? Because even though it's fleas, we know the fleas were biting rats that are infected. The rats are carriers. That means they carry the disease, but they don't necessarily get sick from it, you know? It's just like where sometimes we catch a sickness, right? And now we have antibodies in it and we don't get sick anymore. Well, they're carriers, but they can still spread it. And in that case, they can spread it because of the fleas. So, all right, good job. Let's read this now our second time, and then I'll leave out words and you guys chime in for me, okay? So the Black Death killed 25 million people. Find out how this disease spread through an entire continent. The plague arrives. It started in Sicily okay? A ship docked in the Messina. But this ship was unlike any, it was a ship of a mysterious had seized the crew. Many of them were already, the townspeople tried the ship away, but it was 2 rats scurried off and into the Messina. The bubonic plague or Black Death had, good. First, people in Messina started. Then the disease rapidly threw out. Soon, millions were dying from the, okay, together and a little louder. Here we go. Plague. And 1,500 a day died in Pisa, Italy. Nearly 800 a day died in Paris, France, fighting off death. With so many getting sick and dying, families were torn. People fled their husbands, their wives. Parents abandoned their sick. Soon there were too many to bury. Corpses were stacked in graveyards. Ditches overflowed with the bodies up in the, people thought it was the end of the, for 5, the Black Death swept through Europe. Historians estimate that 25 million people. It had a bigger impact than any other in history. Today, we know that the plague, yes, was carried by rats. The rats had that bit and infected them. But back then, no one knew how the spread. There was no for it. All right, the next slide, and at the top, of brutal death. What exactly was the Black Death, and how did it? People. First, it began with then came chills, nausea, and soon red blotches appeared on these. Lymph nodes in the armpits swelled to the size of. After that, the nodes grew until they turned and oozed blood, and in most cases, death came soon afterward. These black, swollen, led people to call the plague the Black Death, the return of the plague. After 5 years, the plague out, but there were outbreaks in later centuries. In 1665, the struck the village of Eyam, England. The epidemic allegedly started when a tailor in Eyam received a contaminated from London. The package was infested with carrying the. Soon after, the people of Eyam started. Instead of fleeing Eyam, the villagers did something. Courageous. Courageous. Yes, big word, courageous. One of our vocabulary words, meaning brave, something brave. They decided to off the village from the rest of the countryside. That way, the plague wouldn't contaminate other. Then the villagers waited for, in the end, 260 people. However, nearly 100 centuries later, in 2000, scientists wanted to know. Some villagers survived the plague. To find out, they did extensive on the survivors' descendants. They discovered a genetic mutation in the descendants called Delta, yes, Delta 32. This mutation may have provided resistance to the plague. Scientists hope this may help them find a plague they want to be, just in case the Black Death strikes. Good. All right. Now, why do scientists think some Eyam residents survived the plague? We just were reading that. Because of a mutation. Genetic means in their genes. They found something different in them from other people. And they named it Delta 32, and it was a genetic mutation. And so something about that meant that while they may have gotten sick, they didn't die. And they were able to go ahead and have kids who had kids who had kids who had kids. And that's why they're studying their great, however many great-grandchildren it was from 1600 to now. Yes, very good. If you were in Eyam during the plague, would you have stayed or would you have tried to escape? Try to escape? I don't know. I think that's an I don't know. I would certainly be tempted, right? I'm going to be very afraid that I'm going to die and the people I love are going to die. But I already know this plague does kill a lot of people, right? And if we quarantine, maybe then the people that I am friends with who don't live in town, who live outside of town, won't catch it. It's hard. I don't know. Like, I would want to be able to stay. I'd be very afraid to stay. I don't know if I would try to escape or not. I think it depends on just how afraid I got, you know? Okay. All right. So, what do you think is some important details in this science feature? What are some things that are important that they talk about it? Outbreaks? Yeah. You think it's important to know the symptoms? Yeah. Okay. Um, I like that they gave us two examples, don't you? There's the first big one, and then they give us another one, and then they let us know that since that, they've been trying to figure out ways to cure it or come up with a vaccine, right? So I kind of like some of that information. Um, I had heard of the Black Death as a teacher studying for years, right? Like I always knew the Black Death hit in Europe, many millions of people died. It was a terrible thing, right? Uh, I've had to read diaries of people who lived during that time period as an English teacher, read about things that people wrote during that time period. So I've read about it. But you know what? Until I read this, I had never seen that it was a ship in Messina and seen how it traveled up and through the whole. I'd never really seen that. I just knew that it had hit and then it had spread quickly and everywhere was dealing with it. And that's all I had ever done. So I kind of think some of that is kind of important. All right, look at the section called A Brutal Death. It's here on the top of 44, right up there. Okay? What are some of those sequence or transition words that they're using up there to help us move through what happens to people when they catch it? First, then, soon, yes. And then you jump down and we've got even after that, right? So we've got those. You see those in the brutal death right here? Where we were at. Was that number one? Okay. Now, number two says, what is the first sign? What's the first sign that you've got the plague? What's the first sign that you caught the bubonic plague or Black Death? Headaches. Yes, sir. Headaches. Okay. You see up there where it said first, you said first, you had found the first, right? Okay, first, it began with a headache. So, good. How might having that Delta 32 mutation affect someone's chances of surviving the plague? You think they're more likely to get sick or less likely to get sick? Less likely if what we found seems to be true. If those are the descendants had that, right? It would be less likely. So, good job. Down at the bottom, you again, under return of the plague, you would be identifying the sequence words like first or after that they would have in there. So anything that goes through, and you will have to put in the order down at the bottom for number 2, number these events in the correct sequence from first, number 1, to 4 last. What happened first, what happened second, what happened third, what happened fourth, as far as in this section, the return of the plague. Okay, you're just matching. Before we read our third reading, notice we have a chart, right? And this chart is the plague and other bioweapons of today, meaning these are diseases. The plague is one of several diseases that could be used as a bioweapon, or somebody could use it in a terrorist attack, right, or against people. They have a section out beside, so you have plague, botulism, Ebola, and Tula Maria. Not Maria. Tula. I don't like MIA on the end. Mia. Tularemia. I think I may need to. Tula Maria. Something. I don't know. Anyway, how it spread is one column. How it attacks the body is the next. How it is treated is the third. Right? So you can go across and see what they are. And then we have questions. A chart organizes information in a way that's easy to compare. So just looking real quick, which of the diseases is not contagious? So you want to look in the section under spread, how it is spread. Which one over there is not contagious? The yellow one, yes, that is botulism. Botulism is actually kind of like food poisoning. So they could actually put something in the food that could make you sick, okay? All right, so then you can't spread it, you just get it by eating food that has that, right? Which disease does it say cannot be treated? Ebola. Ebola, right, and we were reading about that. So, very good, okay? And then his last question was, what are 2 pieces of advice to give to people who hope to avoid getting a disease, one of these diseases? Well, these are the things that you have been doing throughout this pandemic, right? So, yes, stay safe by social distancing. If you know there's something, wear a mask, right? Check for symptoms, right? And then talk to a medical professional if you've got some type of symptoms going on, right? If you do get sick, stay home. Those would be all things that you could do, right? So, very good. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Clear your throats, get ready. I know it's fun with the masks. We will read this all the way through. We will not read the little red headings like the plague arrives or fighting off death. We're just going to read straight through. Okay, guys? So it's the Black Death. The Black Death killed 25 million people. We'll find out how this disease spread through an entire continent. Okay, 3, 2, 1. It started in Sicily in 1347. A ship docked in the town of Messina. But this ship was unlike any other. It was a ship of death. A mysterious illness had seized the crew. Many of them were already dead. The townspeople tried to turn the ship away, but it was too late. Rats scurried off the ship and into the streets of Messina. The bubonic plague, or Black Death, had arrived. First, people in Messina started dying. Then the disease spread rapidly throughout Europe. Soon, millions of people were dying from the plague. At one point, 500 people a day died in Pisa, Italy. Nearly 800 people a day died in Paris, France. With so many people getting sick and dying, families were torn apart. People fled their homes. Husbands left their wives. Parents abandoned their sick children. Soon there were too many bodies to bury. Corpses were stacked high in graveyards. Ditches overflowed with the dead. Bodies piled up in the streets. People thought it was the end of the world. For 5 years, the Black Death swept through Europe. Historians estimate that it killed 25 million people. It had a bigger impact than any other disease in history. Today, we know that the Black Plague was carried by rats. The rats had fleas that bit people and infected them. But back then, no one knew how the plague spread. There was no cure for it. Ernie? What exactly was the Black Death, and how did it kill people? First, it began with a headache. Then came fevers, chills, nausea, and pain. Soon, red blotches appeared on the skin. The lymph nodes in the armpits swelled to the size of eggs. After that, the nodes grew hard until they turned black and oozed blood and pus. In most cases, death came soon afterward. These black, swollen lumps led people to call the plague the Black Death. After 5 years, the plague died out, but there were outbreaks in later centuries. In 1665, the plague struck the village of Eyam, England. The epidemic allegedly started when a tailor in Eyam received a contaminated package from London. The package was infested with fleas carrying the plague. Soon after, the people of Eyam started dying. Instead of fleeing Eyam, the villagers did something courageous. They decided to seal off the village from the rest of the countryside. That way, the plague wouldn't contaminate other villages. Then the villagers waited for death. In the end, 260 people died. However, nearly 100 survived. Centuries later, in 2000, scientists wanted to know why some villagers survived the plague. To find out, they did extensive research on the survivors' descendants. They discovered a genetic mutation in the descendants called Delta 32. This mutation may have provided resistance to the plague. Scientists hope this information may help them find a plague vaccine. They want to be prepared just in case the Black Death strikes again. All right, now what you are left to do, since we have done our writing, is that you have the bell ringers and you have the questions. Remember, these are found in Google Slides, right? So when you open up your Chromebook, you'll want to go to Google Slides, go to, the waffle, the Google drop-down box, go to Slides, open in Slides, okay, and work. Do not turn in this slide presentation. And if you did, I need to go to make sure that it's not turned in. You wait till we tell you to turn it in at the end after we finish the whole module, because if you turn it in, you can't type in it anymore. So I have to give it back to you, okay? So let me make sure with that. Okay.
Can I stop the recording?
Yes.